Welcome to Tomorrow Never Knows with me, Bob Wilson, and Sir Warren Brown in the Beatles Kingdom. Our guest is an author, musician, award-winning composer, and Mr. Brooke Halpin all at once. Brooke will be talking all things Beatles, but we focus on his work, A Magical Mystery Time. But first we have to take care of the business, and we tell you, Beatles Magazine is a publication with 370 plus million visitors and all their pages, read by thousands of fans around the world every day. Beatles news is updated daily, 24 hours, audio, video, photos, interviews, contests, additional materials, and so much more. So follow that Beatles magazine, kids, the most complete online coverage, 24 hours a day, and how many days a week, Peanuts Gallery?
8 days
Eight
a
days a
week.
week.
I love it. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You guys could say hello to each other now if you want.
How you doing, Brooke? Nice to have you on the show again.
Oh, well, for God's sake, it's nice to be here again. And I want to wish you, Bob and Job and Warren and all the folks out there in Beatle Land, and of course everyone who tunes into Tomorrow Never Knows. I want them to know that I wish them a very sincere, very happy, joyous, and most importantly, healthy 2020 for us all.
Amen.
Don Tootin.
And thank you, Brooke. I appreciate that.
Let's cut to the chase. Tell us how A Magical Mystery Time came about.
Well, I'll tell you, Bob, how it came about. It came about because I was there when the Beatles were happening, when they first appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, and they came over to America on February 7th. I saw the whole thing happen, and I would tell people that I'd met John Lennon at his 31st birthday party, and people found it hard to. Well, out of they believed me certainly, but it wasn't something that happened to just anybody, I guess, and it didn't happen to a lot of people. So I was extremely fortunate to go to the party, and then I thought, well, since there seems to be an interest in that, why don't I write a book about what I experienced when the Beatles were together, starting from 1964, from February 7th, 1964, until actually it goes up until the day that I met John in October 9th, 1971. And so I wrote the book, and I think it's very important because it's something that people who, from a different generation, people that are younger than say Warren and I'm guessing Warren and I might be about the same age, is that it gives them an opportunity to see, to find out, and to experience what happened when the Beatles were together. It's one thing for people to experience the Beatles now, younger generations, and don't get me wrong, I think it's fantastic that there are so many people who love the Beatles that are a lot younger than me. But it's very different for them to listen to any of their recordings now, whether it's streaming or what have you, than it was when the Beatles were together. There was a certain magic that was occurring, because I was experiencing, as a lot of people my age were, we were experiencing it as it was happening, as it was being created and released. And there was a certain magic that occurred at that time. And that's the primary reason why I wrote the book, because I want people to read the book and transport back. I have the ability to transport them back to the time and to the years when the Beatles were together, when all the magic was happening.
Well, I'd like to go through the plot, but first I'd like to pick your brain a little more on that birthday party that was in upstate New York, I believe. Was Ringo at
Yeah,
that one too?
yeah, I met Ringo. That was the first time I met Ringo at that party. Ringo, Phil Spector was there, Allen Ginsberg, some of the Velvet Underground. Jim Keltner was there, of course. He was the one who invited me to the party, which is amazing. And Yoko's parents and a number of other people. There were not that many people at the party. I'd say maybe I don't know, 30 maybe. I'm guessing approximately. It wasn't a big party, maybe 35. Yeah, so that was back then at the Syracuse at the Emerson Museum of Art, because that's where Yoko was having an art exhibit at that same time, and on October 9th, 1971.
Now, was
Wow.
Allen Ginsberg at the party inflicting his poetry on everyone? Was he
Well,
sitting
he
in
was,
the corner
shall
like,
we say, shall we say, he was floating around, as most people were floating at that time.
Mm.
I'm just curious because he was close to Dylan for a time. What was Allen Ginsberg doing? You could give me anything from eating a rich cracker with canopies, as they said in Godfather 2, or you could tell me he was reading his poetry, banging on a bongo. I'm just curious. What was.
Well, he was banging it on some sort of drum later on. But to be honest with you, I didn't give a hoot about Allen Ginsberg. I was,
Or a howl?
I was really just very focused on speaking with John, which I did. And so, Allen Ginsberg was not, even though he is certainly a shall we say, a luminary when it comes to societal changes that were occurring during the 60s. Absolutely, he was a big social force that was happening, and that's one reason why I believe John and him were, such good buddies. But I met him, I shook his hand, and I don't even know what the hell we said, and I was just off to try to find John, strolling about at the party.
No, what was. I got to ask before we get into it because I'm fascinated. So you're at the party and Allen Ginsberg's running around, and then you got the Velvet Underground. They're like very shades and like dark clothes, and they don't like anything. Like even Lou Reed said he doesn't like the Beatles. So they're like German art students on a bad day who are constipated, kind of. As much as I like Lou Reed's music, so as they're walking around the birthday party, what is the Velvet Underground doing?
Well, again, they were, to me, they were like atmosphere. That I was not interested at all, really, in meeting them, even though they had a name and, because of Andy Warhol and all that. I was not into that whole scene. I was there because John was there. I didn't really care about the other folks. So
So
that's
was
my answer.
everyone like was the Velvet Underground and Ginsberg all courting up to John, or were they just mingling? I'm
No, they
just
were
trying
all
to picture this party.
no, no, they were all mingling about and having snacks and no, they were not. No, John. When I met John at the party, he was actually in a room with Yoko and her parents. There was no one else in the room. It was just me and John and Yoko and her parents, which was pretty shocking because John didn't know who the hell I was. So,
Well, it's better than not knowing who Yoko's parents were, I guess.
Yeah.
well, Yoko was explaining this wall exhibit that she did to her parents, and she was speaking, and I was standing right next to John, and he looked at me like, who the hell are you, man? And I didn't, as much as I wanted to speak with him, it was such a small room, an exhibit room, that I didn't want to be disrespectful to Yoko and to John, so I didn't say anything. And she's going on and on about, she had like, there were some small doors up on the wall, and with some clouds painted over the doors, and it was like, well, if you open this door, then you'll see another cloud, and you'll see the word yes, or whatever the hell it was that she was doing back then. So, but I didn't want to be disrespectful, so I just stood next to John, and he kept staring at me. And so I felt extremely uncomfortable. So he drove me out of the room without saying a word, which is pretty powerful. That's how intense, the type of intensity that he had. But the good news is that I saw him later at the party, and he was friendly, and we shook hands, and we chatted a little bit, and I wished him happy birthday, and he thanked me for coming and all that good stuff. So we did sort of a 180 degrees, which was really very nice.
Did they try to get all four Beatles to come to that and only Ringo showed up, or am I like talking through my aperture?
Well, I think that in 1971, at that time, Paul was busy. He was forming his band Wings at the time. So, and I know they were getting ready to release that Wings Wildlife album, which was the first Wings album after Ram. So I don't know. He may have been out of the country. He may not even been in the U.S. I don't know. And George also, as you know, in '71, he had just come off the heels, of course, of All Things Must Pass and the success of that. And I don't think Paul and George were in the U.S. at the time. But Ringo was, and, he was very nice, very friendly, as he always is. I've seen Ringo a couple of times now.
Well, he was on your show.
He was on my radio show, that's right, Come Together with the Beatles a couple of years ago. And the first thing I said to him, which is kind of funny, I said, Ringo, it's great to see you again. I met you at John Lennon's birthday party in Syracuse in 1971, and he went, oh yeah, I remember it so well, because of course he couldn't remember back then. Yeah, he's a sweet guy, absolutely.
Now, your book seemed more serious than I expected at first glance. I know you can be a serious cat, as the hippies say, and you're an intelligent fellow, but I expected more of a bouncy, fun trip through Beatledom, but the book seemed much more serious than I expected. So can you talk a bit about the plot to your piece of work?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, Bob. Is it can be construed as being somewhat funny, because this kid, who's really me, this Trevor Hampton character, he becomes delusional. Not that I was, but I did certainly believe that I had a connection with the Beatles. I really did, even back then. That this kid, it's more of a dramedy, and probably perhaps more of a drama than a comedy. Although some people can read it, and sometimes it's kind of silly. But what was going on at that time was that in my particular situation with my family, is that my father was a jock, and he did not like the Beatles at all. You can go so far as to say that he might have even hated the Beatles. So when I became this Beatle kid, when I combed my hair down and I got into a band and all that, it just sort of exacerbated the tension between me and my dad. So even though there is this plot about how Trevor evolves as a musician, with his bands and with his music career and with his recording career and songwriting abilities. At the same time, there's this relationship, which is a subplot between him and his father. And the crazy thing is, and this is the truth, by the way, the book is probably, I'd say, about 80%, maybe even 85% true. And then the rest is fictionalized for dramatic effect. But the crazy thing is, and this is a true part of the story, is that when I was up in Syracuse meeting John, on that very day, my father got shot and nearly died. So that when I came back to Hartford, Connecticut, I got a message. We went to my dad's house in Wethersfield, and I called up my uncle, and he told me that my father was in the hospital. Is that the bullet, it was kind of like that the bullet that hit actually my dad was shot in the neck, I think a couple of times. But fortunately it didn't hit one of the main arteries. And so that it was kind of a freeing in a way, where it freed me up, and it was some kind of a signal, I can't quite explain it, that would happen on the same day that I met John Lennon. And so then when my dad was released from the hospital, I went back to my dad's house, and I tried to help him out for a while. And we became, shall we say, we had a better relationship after he had that terrible thing happen to him. But see, the shot of my dad and me meeting John, it kind of brought me down to earth in a way. And I think that's what happened also, with my relationship with my dad. So getting to the book, That's part of the plot, is the evolution of this character, Trevor Hampton, where he starts off as this Beatle kid who thinks he is a Beatle, and once he meets John and he realizes that, John didn't know him, because in the book he thought that John knew him because of the messages he was getting through all these dreams. And he had these dreams about the Beatles, and John would speak to him in the dreams. So he really thought, unlike me, but in the book, this character thought that John knew him. So that when he meets John, he says in the book, "Hey, John, you know me. I'm Trevor Hampton." And John goes, hate to burst your bubble. The dream's over, buddy. I don't know who the fuck you are. That kind of thing. Excuse me. Who the hell you are? So anyhow, that was the bubble burst for him, and it forced him to come down to earth. He realized that this whole thing was, this whole Beatle trip and his false identity of going around and talking, "Oh, I'm Trevor Hampton, and I'm from Liverpool," because actually that's what I used to do back then. I used to speak that way. Not because I thought it was true, because I thought it was, good PR and good business for the band, and actually it was. Because when we were playing, we had a fan club, and girls would actually pass out when I'd say things like, "Okay, we're going to do the next number. You might know this one. What's it? Lexi, what are we doing tonight? Oh, I saw her standing there." And I'm not exaggerating. In 1965. There were a number of girls, and when we did that, they would actually pass out, and we would get mobbed and the whole thing. So we were kind of like the local Beatles in New England at the time. So it's very important that this book goes through this whole process of this kid having to come down to earth, and it happened at the same time when his dad got shot in the neck. Very interesting, I'd say.
Well, I'm very glad your dad recovered to start there. And
Thank you. Yeah.
of course, and I didn't know that, so I was shocked. But I have to ask about this phenomenon. I haven't seen anyone. I went to a Police concert with Sting, Andy Summers, and Stuart Copeland when I was about 15, and
Right.
the women acted. Well, women, they were teenagers, but like the girls behind us were going insane. It's like the only time that was the closest thing I saw to Beatlemania, which was probably a far cry from it. But that's pretty cool that you could just put on a Liverpudlian accent and have women falling over like you were a hypnotist. Please go on about this a little more. And you're an intelligent guy. I mean, the band I'm sure was exciting, but women fainting. What do you think spurred this on? This really hasn't happened since in this wacky, crazy world of ours, where you could put on an accent like from Scotland or something, and women are passing out. Sounds like kind of a good deal.
It was a huge deal, and my drummer and lead guitar player were both from Scotland, so they had the Scottish brogues as well. So having listened to McCartney, Lennon, and George and Ringo, I knew how to speak like them back then. So I thought, what the hell? I'll go ahead and do it and have some fun. And sure enough, as you said, it really actually worked like a charm. We had, like I said, we had this fan club, and girls were chasing us around. And one place we played in Massachusetts, and when we got so mobbed, they actually ripped the buttons off our sports coats. Obviously it was nothing like Beatlemania, but it was local Beatlemania, I guess you could call it. So, and it also tied in. The book ties in not only with what was going on with Trevor Hampton and the Beatles, but I want people to know that there was a social revolution that was going on in the 60s, and some people know about that and some people don't. And I was swept up in that. So that while the Beatles were happening, which of course they were the champions and the leaders of the whole generation, they were the leaders for sure, that while that was happening with the Beatles, we had things that were going on like questioning authority and being rebellious. And then there was the whole free love aspect of the 60s and drugs. So, that was going on. And let me tell you, I don't know how much you or Warren have read my book, but it's loaded with that. So it's not just about me or Trevor Hampton and his fantasy with the Beatles. It's about the 60s. It's about all those things I just mentioned. And those things really did happen in my life at that time. And I thought, well, this is the way the world is, and it was at that time, because of the free love and the drugs and questioning authority and all that, is that I thought that's the way that life is, and that's the way the world's going to be. And so, again, when people read this book, A Magical Mystery Time, which, by the way, is only available, I believe, only at barnesandnoble.com, is that if they want to find out what the 60s were like and what the Beatles were doing and how their incredible influence impacted this kid named Trevor Hampton, then they really need to read my book. And it's not only what the Beatles did and the influence they had on this kid, which of course is me. It's the same kind of influence, and I know people that I've met through the years who are about my age, and they say the same thing. They saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, and before they knew it, they had a guitar in their hand, and before they knew it, they had a band. Now, they maybe didn't have the experiences that I did, but they certainly knew that whatever the Beatles were doing, they wanted to do. So when the Beatles grew a mustache, then we all grew mustaches. And when the Beatles were wearing naval jackets, we all grew naval jackets. Then when Beatles started wearing silk scarves, we all started wearing silk scarves. That's what was happening back then. It was an incredible movement, and it was magical. And that's why I call the book A Magical Mystery Time.
Well, let's have a bit of a lock, Professor. You talked about this free love as a societal phenomenon. Free love?
Yeah.
In the decades past, how much did it cost? Before it was free.
Well, that's a hell of a question, and I'll tell you something, my friend. I'll tell you something.
Back then it was cheap, Bob.
Back then it was free, but there was a cost. There was a cost, and here's the cost. And Warren may or may not agree with me. The cost is this. Number one, I thought that there will always be a woman that will fawn after me. That as long as I have a guitar in my hand and I sing and I'm in a band, that there's going to be a woman or two at the end of the night. And because that's the way it was, I'm not exaggerating, back in the 60s with the bands that I had. So
well, if they're fainting, I assumed as much. When you're friends, sort of, and you've been on the show a lot, we sort of, it's hard to give the other guy credit. You want to needle them, you're your friend. But I don't want to give you credit for anything. I even think you bought your award at a garage sale. I'm just pulling your leg. But women are fainting. I'm pretty sure you got a couple of girls coming up and saying hello to you after the show. So I bet you snuck a kiss or two.
Well, he probably did. But the point I'm trying to make is that it set a precedent for me. And it was costly because I didn't think I had to settle down with anyone. I thought that, okay, well, that was wonderful. Gee, I wonder who's going to come around tomorrow. And that's not good. That's costly. And it has caused problems for me. It really has, because it set this condition in my life.
Can't you just get them made? I'm sorry. I mean,
yeah. Well, Bob Dylan put it quite nicely when he sang the song "Lay Lady Lay."
Yeah.
And that's what was going on, thanks to Bob saying that. But the other thing that was bizarre, and it's in the book, and this is the true story, and I thought I'd mention it, is that I was living out here in, I guess it was Hermosa Beach at the time. And there was an apartment building, and there was this. I had a girlfriend, and then I had another girlfriend, and then there was a girl living in the building who was living with some guy. His name, I believe, was Bob. I think his name was Bob, actually. It wasn't you, Bob. Was it you, Bob? I don't know. Was it you?
Not to my recollection.
BD.
It may have been the Bulldog. I'm not sure. But anyhow, what happened was she used to work for the airlines, and then they broke up, and then she moved to some other place. I don't know where the hell it was. And then she called me up, and she invited me over to her place, and I went over there, and we ended up, of course, in the bedroom, and we were having some very intimate relations going on between us. And this is a true
This used to
story.
be a G-rated show.
It used to be.
I'm being careful. I'm being careful with my words here. I'm trying to be careful. Yeah. So G for good, right? Or
Right.
groovy.
G for whatever, I don't know.
Yeah.
The gendarmes
So
are
we
coming.
so we were, we were having fun in her bedroom, and at one point she started screaming at me, and she said, "This is a true story," and I was not. There was no drugs involved that night, and she said, "You're not Brooke. You're the Beatles." And I said, "What the hell are you talking about?" I said, "No, it's me. It's Brooke." And she goes, "No, you're the Beatles. Get off of me." And I thought, okay, so then I did. And it was so bizarre because we used to have parties before that where she would attend and I would impersonate each of the Beatles. So I guess she thought that maybe I had the ability, and perhaps I did, to really channel them. Because I would get on the guitar, and I would do stuff like Hide Your Love Away, and I would sing like John, and I would talk like John, with a nasal tone in his voice. And his voice like that, Bob. And then I would do a Paul song. Oh, it's Paul McCartney. It's so nice to be here tonight at the party, everyone. Hope you're all having a good time. So I was able to do that. Of course, George Harrison, all he wanted to do was play the guitar with the Beatles and all that kind of thing. So maybe this all got wrapped up in her head. And it was just crazy. And so I got out of there as quick as I could. And the nice thing was is that when I got back to my apartment, my roommates, I was walking up to the building, and on the wall I saw that there was a light in my room. And I thought, well, Jesus, maybe someone's in my bedroom. And I went up there, and there was a poster on the wall. And it was a single candle. And it was a black and white poster, and it said, when the night is cloudy, there is still a light that shines on me, shine until tomorrow. And then at the bottom it said, let it be. And it was just, the timing was absolutely perfect. And that's in the book. So these were some of the magical things, that were going on in the book. And if people want to find out about it, they really should take a look at Barnes and Noble and take.
Well, I definitely recommend the book. And I think it's fascinating to have had a fan club. That must be fun. When changing the topic from you being on topic, Vigrella thinks you're all four Beatles at once, which is a credit to your stamina. I just want to move over to the fan club. When people join this fan club, did they send in like 50 cents and they got like a button and a fan club card? What came along with the fan club?
No, there was this girl, bless her heart. We played at Penny High School. It was called Penny High. Not to be confused with Penny Lane, but there's another connection, by the way. This was 1965, 2 years before Penny Lane came out. And we were playing, and that's when the girls started fainting, when I was speaking with my Liverpudlian accent. Then she came up to me, and she said, that I'm going to start the name of my band at the time, she said, it was the Pandemoniums. So she said she was going to start the Pandemonium fan club, which she did. And we would go over to her house, and we'd bring over our acoustic guitars, and the fan club members would come over, and we would, we'd play for them for like about an hour or so. And it went on for maybe about a year, I think, maybe a year and a half, and then it kind of pivoted out. But it was, it was quite an honor. I mean, it was very exciting that someone would take the time to spend to let people know about the band, the Pandemoniums. It was really nice, and we had, I don't know, maybe 300 members or something, just in the Hartford area. But still.
So they didn't get a decoder ring?
They didn't what?
Get a decoder ring? Like when I joined the Dick Tracy fan club, I got like a button, a membership card, and a decoder.
No, they didn't get any buttons. We didn't have any buttons or anything like that. We just went over and saw them once a month.
Was it from South Dakota or North Dakota?
No,
I now hand over to Warren.
well,
The senator from Michigan has the remainder of my time.
Yeah,
All right,
it was
thanks.
a lot. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, it really was.
Thanks, Bulldog. Brooke, I'm going to regress a little bit with a couple of comments and a question. First of all, when you said there was a cost for free love back in the 60s, I thought your answer was going to be the cost would be you would end up in a clinic.
Well, funny that you should mention that, Warren, because that gal whose name I don't remember. I think her name may have been the airline stewardess. May have been. I don't remember her name. Oh, yes, I do. It was Bunny of all names. Her name was Bunny.
Bunny.
Yeah, because she was, messing around a bit. So, so I had to go see a doctor, and they gave me.
Yes.
They gave me a shot of penicillin or whatever it was, and it wasn't anything too drastic, or it didn't last too long. I'm happy.
Penicillin is under my skin and in my veins. I will say no more. I apologize for interrupting. Sunk to Penny Lane.
That was the
penicillin.
Yeah, there you go.
Penicillin, yeah. Well, that was, shall you say that she had skin in the game, or at least I had skin in the game, or something like that. But anyhow, good question, Warren. Very good.
All right. You also mentioned that Yoko was at John Lennon's birthday party. That's pretty surprising to me. But you got to meet her and you got to speak with her. And myself, I would like to know how she was, and is she as bad as everyone thinks?
Okay, good question as well. Well, you see, the reason why she was there and the reason why John was there is because she was having it was her art exhibit at this museum. Mm-hmm. And it coincided with it being at the same time as John's birthday, October 9th, 1971. And she was glued to John, I would say. She was constantly with John, like she was in 68 and 69 and 1970 as well. So I didn't really speak to the Yoko, although the funny thing is that many years later, in 1985, 86, when I was living in New York, I was walking along Central Park South one cold morning on my way to work with Martha Graham at her dance company as a pianist and a composer. And I saw this woman, and she was holding a little boy's hand. And I knew that it was Yoko. And so I quickened up my pace so I could get up to her. And sure enough, I looked to my left. And she was with a man named Sam, and she was involved with this Hungarian guy at the time named Sam. And I said, "Excuse me, hi, Yoko, it's Brooke Halpin." And I said, "I met you at John's birthday party in Syracuse." And she turned and she said, "Oh, you were there." I said, "Yeah, I was there." It was very exciting to meet John and to meet you. And she goes, she thanked me for, after being there, which is kind of ridiculous, but she was very nice to me. She asked me what I was doing, and I told her what I was doing, and she was very nice, very friendly. And I told her I was composing music for dance, which I was. I was composing ballet scores and music for modern dance scores, and I was doing some soundtracks at the time. Mm-hmm. And she said she'd like to hear my music. And so she said, just send it to the Dakota, and she'd like to hear it. So, I mean, come on, people paint her as a witch and all, but I can't say that she was to me, because that's exactly what went down between Yoko and I when we met that day in 1985.
Sounds interesting. And I never met her, but I don't think, from what I've read and everything else, I don't think she's as bad as everybody thinks she is. and myself, I argue with Bob all the time about.
Why do you have to drag me into this in a negative light? I'm not
Because
speaking.
you're part of it. Uh,
Are
anyway,
you hoping she's listening so she hates me and loves you? I'm just wondering.
yeah, I'm trying to get in good with her here.
At my expense.
Maybe she'll leave me some of her millions. All right, to get back on track here, Brooke. How did talk to a film regarding magical mystery time into becoming a film?
Oh, okay. Well, what happened is I'd written the book, and then I frequent this restaurant here in Malibu too often, actually. And so I was speaking with the hostess, and I speak with all the hostesses there usually. And so I told her, she said, "What you doing?" I said, "Well, I just finished this book, A Magical Mystery Time, and I'm kind of looking for someone to do a screenplay adaptation of the book." So as it turned out, usually when you say stuff like that, usually nothing ever happens.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went back in like the next week or so, and she goes, "Oh, by the way, someone came in here just the other day, and he's a screenwriter. And I told him about you and your book, and he loves the Beatles. And here's he left me his phone number. So I called this guy up, and he was teaching English at a private school down in Orange County out here. And we had a great conversation, and he said he loves the Beatles and that he would love to read my book. So I sent him the book, and then soon after that, he contacted me and said he would love to write the screenplay with me. His name is Frank Thurmond. And so together, Frank and I, we wrote this together, and then around about a year later or so, I guess it was about a year later, I had met Bob Fitzpatrick. Now, Bob Fitzpatrick was an attorney who was hired by Brian Epstein to handle the Beatles' legal affairs on the West Coast. And primarily, Robert's goal and objective was to retrieve Brian Epstein's stolen briefcase. Now, that's a whole other story, which we can get into at some time. So what happened was that I was doing editing for a writer in Orange County, and she told me that she had an attorney friend who was looking for someone to help him with his business, and he wanted to do movies. No, he wanted to start a record label. That's what it was. He wanted to start a record label. And because I had, years of experience in the recording industry, I met this guy, and he told me that his partner was Robert Fitzpatrick. And so I met Robert, and Robert and I really connected, and he was the sweetest guy in the world. And he then also was, even though I became the A&R director, I was the vice president and A&R director for the record label called Vista Avenue, and I brought one band in, and I signed them to a record deal, and they actually were able to make their album, was that Robert was also the president of Allied Artists, Motion Pictures. And so when Robert heard that I had a screenplay about the Beatles, Frank and I gave it to him, and he loved it. And he presented it to the CEO, whose name is Kim Richards, who's the CEO of Allied Artists. And they presented with me the opportunity with a distribution deal. Now, I don't know how much you know about the film industry, but very rarely do you get a distribution deal before the movie is made. Usually you make the movie, and then you get a distribution deal. But they were doing that to try to help me to get the movie made and to raise the funds.
Wow.
So Robert, that's how that whole thing happened with the Magical Mystery Time. And Frank had a student whose father was this multimillionaire down in Orange County. And he loved the Beatles so much that he had "Hey Jude" tattooed to his shoulder. because, of course, we know the lyric, the movement you need is on your shoulder from Hey Jude.
Mm-hmm.
So I met this guy, and he read the screenplay, and he said he committed to give us $1 million to start the fundraising process to make the film. It probably would have cost us about maybe $8 million to make the movie back then. That was 2009. So that's what was happening, and that's how we went from the book to a screenplay.
Wow, all that's very interesting, and I'm not familiar with the film industry.
Well, the movie was never made. No, an $8 million film is peanuts out here. That's considered at the very, very low end of the spectrum.
Yeah, and like I said, I know nothing about the film industry, so
yeah.
I appreciate that.
But now, what's interesting? Let me excuse me for interrupting, but
no, that's all right. Go ahead.
Coming off the coattails, if you will, of the heels of this movie yesterday. If I sent these photographs, I think, Bob, you've seen them, where Allied Artists is now going out there again, and they're in the process of trying to make the film and raise funds to make it. And they actually took some pictures of me from when I was like 18 and 19. Mm-hmm. And did you see them, Bob, where they have me? They did some great Photoshop work where instead of 4 Beatles, it's 5 Beatles. Did you see them, Bob?
Yes, and I enjoyed them. You should send them to Warren afresh so we can edit them into this video.
I will. I'll do that. Yeah.
But is the movie still in the works?
Well, evidently, yeah, because, listen, the Beatles franchise will never die. It's the biggest franchise going, although some people may argue that Star Wars is the biggest one. But when it comes to music, it's either, the Beatles is the biggest franchise. That's why there's always going to be a movie about the Beatles every so often. And God knows there's going to be books about the Beatles every year, even though they're a regurgitation of a regurgitation. People just want to read them. There's a never-ending thirst for the Beatles.
I agree. So, pretty interesting, and I agree 100% with you. They'll constantly be writing books, and there's so many fans out there and that have ran into the Beatles or one of the Beatles or have seen the Beatles, and each one of them's going to write their own book, and
that's right.
You're going to get a different perspective from everyone.
That's right.
So,
that's right.
What other people did you work with on your project?
Well, as I mentioned, Frank Thurman was the most instrumental one to get the book from the book to the screenplay. And then the next person, as I mentioned, was Robert Fitzpatrick, because he's the one who presented it to Allied Artists. And then, of course, there was the investor from Orange County. So these were very principal players in the process of trying to get this film made. We also had a director by the name of Arthur Allen Seidelman, who had done some pretty big pictures, and he was on board to direct it. So we were getting pretty damn close. But those are the most important people, and those are the names that were involved with the screenplay at that time.
Okay, very interesting. I got one more question, then I'll hand it back over to the Bulldog. I hear him growling in the background, and I don't want him to bite me anymore. Will you score any new music for the film?
You mean for A Magical Mystery Time?
Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah. Well, these were my bands at the time, and at that time I had written dozens of songs. So there would be original music that I had written back then that would be recorded with a band today. And then in terms of also the bands back then, of course, we did Beatle covers, so there would be our cover versions of the hits that the Beatles had back then. But then there would be some incidental scoring, but not much. I didn't want to do some of this stuff where, there's a scene going on, a dramatic scene, and you have the sweeping violins and all that. I wanted to do it. My vision was that since it's a film about music and about this kid and about the Beatles and also Trevor and his bands, there's enough music there, and it makes it more realistic. Because when I watch these movies, and there's a scene of a guy and a girl, or a guy and a guy nowadays, or whatever it might be, or a woman and a woman, and it's romantic, and then all of a sudden you hear all these strings and stuff. I'm like, I don't see any orchestra. Where's the orchestra? So anyhow, that's just my sort of pet peeve with all that. So that's the answer to your question, Warren.
All right, I thank you for that, and I'll hand it over to the Bulldog.
Well, everybody complained about the Elvis films because he'd pick up like a ukulele on the beach and he'd have like Guy Lombardo's orchestra behind him. I always thought that was kind of cool. Like Blue Hawaii, those kind of things.
Well, listen, if the orchestra's on the beach with him, I got no problem with that. But if there's no orchestra on the beach and all of a sudden you're watching Elvis on the beach with the ukulele and you're hearing an orchestra, it's like, well, where the hell's the orchestra? There's no orchestra there.
It's the magic of film.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying. Yeah.
Now, if the film becomes a huge hit and, you're plastered all over the pages of Beatledom and Hollywooddom and all other kinds of dumbs, will you leave us behind and pretend not to know us even more than you do now when we're not recording?
I think you know the answer to that question. I think the both of you know me well enough to know that
you'll never talk to us again.
You're lucky he does now, Bulldog.
You'll be sending postcards from Greta Garbo's house or something. There's like lawn parties with buffets.
I'm not that kind of guy. I'm the kind of guy that when I have friends and I have relationships with people that, of course, except for like Bunny, of course, I couldn't keep that one going. But
what was her last name? Was it something like Rabbit, Bunny Rabbit, or?
Yeah, well, she was a bunny.
Like that in the book?
Yeah, she was hopping around. No, I didn't name her Bunny in the book. I think that was her real name. But anyhow, what I'm trying to say is that, when I have relationships and friends and all that, and I've got friends, that I was back in Massachusetts recently, that friends from 1964 that are still friends of mine, and from 1971 that are still friends of mine. So it doesn't matter, whether I have a feature film that's out there that's doing very well, and if not, I'm the same guy. I'm not going to be all of a sudden become an egomaniac. That's not who I am.
Well, if I ever somehow stumble onto a big film, I will become an egomaniac.
Well, it's a good thing we have the opportunity to speak with you now before that happens then, Bob.
You should feel blessed. But I'll send postcards from Greta Garbo's house and stuff like that.
Oh, okay. All right.
No, every once in a while, what do they call it? You're an educated man. Like when you ask a question from left field, is that known as a non sequitur?
Well, it could be a non sequitur, or it could be a non firster or a non thirder. I guess it depends upon the sequence, Bob.
I'll take it. But so now I want to know a non sequitur. Now, tell us about playing with Scarlett Rivera of Bob Dylan fame and the Rolling Thunder Tour, will you please?
Oh, yes. Well, Scarlett. Well, let's see. What happened was, living out here in Malibu, I was going to one of the happy hours, and there were a couple of women at the bar.
Most of your stories start out that way.
Say it again?
Most of your stories since the mid-'60s start out that way.
Well, he stole two of my best girls, too.
I was going to ask about that. We'll call them like Gertrude and Hildegard. Gertrude and Hildegard used to post art on our pages and bring us people. I see you now all but own them. They're in like the Brooke harem.
Yeah. Well, that's where, Procol Harum got the idea. But anyhow. So
I want to trade. I want like a shortstop and a minor league third baseman for them. We gave them away for nothing. That was Warren should have handled that better. But anyway, back to Scarlett Rivera.
So I'm sitting at the bar at happy hour, and there's a couple of women unattended by males, and one was, we just started chatting because I'm a sociable guy, And it turned out that they knew a famous musician who I knew, and he was going to be at this dinner party like that weekend. So they invited me to this dinner party, and I went. And there was Karen Lee, who was Albert Lee's wife, who I had met previously. And there was Don Peake, who was the guitar player, who we both knew. And then there was Scarlett Rivera, who also attended the dinner party. And Scarlett and I started talking, and she told me what she had done, and I told her that I'd written a lot of music for the violin, which I have. Not only for my recording that I did with Molly's Pilgrim, which is the film that won the Academy Award back in 1986. There's a lot of violin in that. But I also, wrote string quartets, and I wrote a symphony, and I wrote a lot of music, unaccompanied violin sonatas and things like that. So we had that violin connection, and I sent her some of my stuff, and she was very impressed, and she thought I was a great composer, quote unquote. So we got together soon after that, and
is there any penicillin involved in this story?
What's that?
Is there any penicillin involved in this story?
No. Absolutely not. No. You don't want to mess about with that kind of thing.
There beneath the blue suburban skies, penicillin.
That's right, even beneath the blue suburban skies in Malibu. So what happened was, we then were going to these parties because Karen then invited me to these jam sessions that Albert Lee was having. And I'd go to the jam sessions, and then Scarlett would be there, and then I would be there, and Albert would be there, and we would play. It would be Albert and me and Scarlett on violin, and Murray Baker, who was the drummer from Janis Joplin in the big holding company. He was there, great guy. We became quite good friends. And George Burnell, who was the bass player from the Strawberry Alarm Clock. So it was that kind of circle of people. And Erwin Kramer, who played also with Ray Charles. So it was a really high level, certainly. And so we'd be playing music together quite often at these jam sessions. And then it was 2014, and unfortunately my mom had passed away. And I wrote this song called Fly Away for my mom, and I wrote this violin part for the song. And at that time, I had met Rick Allen's wife, Rick Allen, the drummer from Def Leppard, and I met his wife, Lauren Monroe, and she was looking for some new material to record, and she came over to my house, and I played Fly Away for her, and we finished it. She helped me out with the lyrics on that song. And then Rick Allen came over, and he said he wanted to produce it. So I said, well, listen, I'd like to get Scarlett in on this. So I called up Scarlett, and then she played the violin on the track. I don't think you've ever heard it. I could send it to you if you'd like to hear it.
We'd like to we could put it at the end of the show if you send it over.
Yeah, sure, I will send it. I'll send it over to you. Yes, of course.
You're not just saying that for the magic of radio. You'll really send it later?
I will. I could.
Like they promise you anything on the show. Like Bob Dylan will be on next week, and then everybody disappears.
No, I can send it to you right now if you'd like.
All right.
I saw Scarlett about 3 weeks ago. A friend of ours, a mutual friend of ours, had passed away, unfortunately, very unexpectedly. That's where the jam sessions used to take place. And so she came with her violin, and I sat in and I sang one song. I sang Stand By Me, and unfortunately she had to leave because she was dashing off to Martha's Vineyard the next morning. But yeah, she's a wonderful person, of course a hell of a musician, just a phenomenal violin player.
Well, I appreciate your sharing that story, because I appreciated her work on the Rolling Thunder and Desire sessions and all that stuff. So I know you play with the biggies, and I wanted to know about that. But I know you also have this quiz book. Can you tell us about that and ask us some questions?
Oh, the quiz book. Do you really know the Beatles? Is that what you're referring to, Bob?
I believe that is the one.
We don't know the Beatles, Brooke.
Well, let me tell you, I'll ask you a few questions for you guys. Let me look here. Okay. On what song on Rubber Soul does Ringo play the organ?
I'm going to guess I'm looking through you. You can go along with that or change it, Warren.
Of Rubber Soul.
Doesn't it go bump, bump, ba-da-da-da, bump, bump, ba-da-da-da? It sounds like there's an organ in there.
Right. All right. I'll go with you.
And you're absolutely correct because it's only 2 notes, and he does a lovely job with those notes. Yes.
Awesome. Good job, Bulldog.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got to get my sound effects up and going.
You could just naturally make them just do the...
All right.
I like that.
Good job.
Now, okay, speaking of Rubber Soul, who wrote the guitar part, the guitar solo for Michelle?
Paul McCartney.
I'm going to guess George Martin, but I run that by you, Warren, because I'm guessing it's not one of the Beatles. George is too obvious an answer, so I'd go with George Martin, but I run it by you for a final answer.
Well, because I don't know, I'm going to go with you and agree with you.
That's always a dangerous proposition, but go ahead.
You are both absolutely correct. You guys are doing wonderful tonight, I'm happy to say.
No, Bulldog is doing wonderful. Good job, Bulldog. That's 2. That's 2
and
for
I think you're going to get the next one as well. This is
pretty Don't jinx it.
For you two guys. Who was the first Beatle to release a solo album, actually a solo record, while the Beatles were still together?
Was it George with the electronic business, Warren?
I agree with George, yes.
Well, you are 50% right.
Or was it Paul McCartney's Christmas album that he never gave anyone?
No, it was George, but it wasn't his electronic music. It was his Wonderwall soundtrack, released on November 1st, 1968.
I like the way Pink Floyd did a cover of that later.
Yeah.
Well, that was an entirely different wall. That's an entirely different wall.
And now Trump is bringing that back. I think it's his campaign slogan. All in all, it's just a hole in the wonder wall. I like that.
I'm not going there.
Controversy to spice up the end of the show.
I'm not going there.
No, you just tell Yoko I hate her on the air. Thank you very much. Okay, go ahead. I don't hate her on the air, I say.
All right, here's one for you. Who wrote and produced the song Sour Milk Sea?
George.
Very good.
And then he gave it to Jackie Lomax.
That's exactly right. George wrote it in India. Mm-hmm. And besides George on the record, who else is on the recording?
Warren?
John Lennon.
I'm not going to go with that final answer. I want to think about that for a second. If Jackie Lomax is playing on it, George wrote it, and it's an Indian song, it could be what you said, but could it be somebody like Ravi Shankar or something?
No, it's not an Indian song. No, George wrote it in India, but it's not an Indian song. It's a rock and roll song.
I'll let Warren get. I'll leave that part up to Warren to guess who else played on it.
I'm gonna stick with John Lennon.
I don't picture Paul going because him and Paul had a lot of contempt going back. Yeah. Ringo would go along with anything, but I've never heard that, so I guess I'll agree with your final answer.
Okay, final answer.
I'm disappointed because you guys were doing so well, but yeah, it's George and it's Paul and it's Ringo who played.
I would not have guessed Paul, but
I would not guess
being
Paul.
Wrong. Yay, we got it wrong. You didn't tell us there were 2 more. That was tricky.
And by the way, Eric Clapton is also on that record, and Nicky Hopkins as well. I mean, you want to talk about amazing musicians.
Yeah.
But it didn't do well at all. And why did this record not do well? Do you have any idea why? It should have, right? With musicians like that, you would think.
Was it poorly promoted because Apple was in a shambles?
Apple had just begun at that time, Bob. These were the first releases on Apple.
Let's hear the Jeopardy music. It helps me think.
Do 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 do.
Because the English milk producers picketed the song because it was anti-milk.
It was too sour for them. Yes,
Yeah,
that's not the answer. Good guess, though.
Yeah, that was a good guess. I would go with the promotion part.
Okay, well, that was part of the problem. The problem is that the Beatles had just started their Apple record label.
Mm-hmm.
And to celebrate the release of their Apple record label, they released the same day that they released Sour Milk Sea. They also released Hey Jude. And
that'll
those were the days.
That'll
and
do
those
it.
Were, and those were the days.
So Apple wasn't a shambles.
Well, no, it was not in a shambles. It had just begun. The problem
They didn't know what they were doing if they put them both out the same day. I thought the Beatles had fist fights over records coming out on the same day.
They thought that Sour Milk Sea would sort of pick up on the coattails, if you will, on all the success of Hey Jude, and it didn't happen because all the radio stations wanted to play, of course, as you know, was Hey Jude,
Mm-hmm.
and then Those Were the Days was also a huge #1 hit, and it just got lost. There was too much. They were actually competing with themselves, and that's why.
I'm sure Jackie Lomax appreciates that.
Yeah, I'm sure he did. I'm sure he had a few words to share with Mr. George Harrison, and it was really unfortunate because I don't know if you ever heard the song, but it's a very good song. It's a damn good song.
Yes, it's better than Daradun, 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 Daradun. That was the one they tried to revive on Anthology, but even the paddles hitting it couldn't bring it back up. Hey, Paul, do you remember that song that I did back in India? Yeah, George. You know, the one Daradun. And then he grabbed his ukulele. Daradun, Daradun, Daradun.
Rather dreary, actually.
And then they did the short version of Blue Moon of Kentucky, which I'm still smarting over.
Oh, that's right. I know. Yeah, I know you wanted Paul to do a longer version, but George
Let's do Blue Moon of Kentucky. No, we have to do the shorter version because I'm still angry about not getting my songs on the records. Back to the questions, and enough of my bitterness.
Now, this is probably a tough one for you guys, but you guys are pretty tough. So, since we're talking about those,
you've been
days,
pretty tough on us. So, go ahead.
Yeah, well, you know,
we know you're not an imposter.
Yeah.
Who wrote the lyrics to Those Were the Days?
I'm gonna guess Paul McCartney.
I'm gonna agree with that. I'm pretty sure he did.
Well, I'm sorry to burst your bubbles, but it was not Paul. Now, Paul produced it. He arranged it and he produced it. But it was Gene Raskin wrote the lyrics to those.
Well, there was no way we're getting that one right. But I loved his cartoon shows about Christmas. Raskin and Bass. Those were good. With the abominable snowman and stuff, put one foot in front of the other.
I don't remember. I didn't.
I'm not going to touch that one, Bob.
There you go.
Would you like to hear my story about Gene or no?
One more question, then the Gene story. I'm like chomping at the bit for a new question. Then tell us the story, please.
Yeah, we're not doing so good.
All right. So who plays bass on Back in the USSR?
I'm gonna guess George, but we'll leave it by one.
I think you're right. I think it was George.
We know it wasn't Ringo.
Yeah, so we got 1 out of 3 shot here. Yeah, I'm going to go with George.
Well, you're partially right.
I love it. We never get a question right. We're always partially right. Okay.
Well, let me explain why. Because
they were on the beach in the Bahamas on the rocks.
Yeah, this is Back in the USSR rocks. No, the reason why it's partially right is because there's 3 bass players on back in the USSR, and they are George, John, and Paul. They all play bass, for God's sake. It's an amazing recording. And if
when we have questions with multiple answers, I want a pre-question warning. There's 3 answers.
There you go.
I see. Okay.
It's like a Phil Spector wall of sound with basses. Again, we're back to the wall, the wonder wall of basses.
The wonder wall. All right. So you want a multiple choice?
I'll take anything that brings back our dignity to some small degree.
Well, we got, in my opinion, we got the last one right.
I agree with you.
You got a third of it right. Yeah, you can't dismiss John and Paul playing the bass on that song.
If I get credit for it, I can do whatever I want.
You could.
My level of denial knows no bounds.
No, but if you listen, no, seriously, when you listen to it, I mean, that's one of the densest recordings. It's so dense.
That's how my 5th grade teacher and none described me.
Well, then maybe you should. Maybe you're playing bass on it as well. I don't know.
Narcos at the airport.
You should play bass on it as well. Yeah.
Bob did play
me to play on his record, Brooke.
Say it again.
Silence. Back in the day, do you know who asked me to play on his record?
Who asked me to play on his record?
Bob Dylan.
Boy, that was like pulling a tooth.
Bob Dylan.
From the John Lennon early political days, David Peel asked me to play on his record when I visited him.
Oh. And
this never happened.
What did you do? Why didn't you do it?
One, I wasn't. All I could have done is sing on his record, and he had kind of a unique voice. But we just went into the village on a goof and hung out with him, and he sold me one of his records. We went to visit. He had the largest record collection I ever saw of vinyl albums. It was like lining the walls. And God knows what else he sold from that apartment, Mr. Marijuana. And as we were sitting there and he was recounting stories about John Lennon and Bob Dylan having been in his apartment sitting in another chair that I wasn't allowed to sit in, he asked if I wanted to play on his record. So it's just a little bit of trivia.
That's very exciting.
Just a bit.
Yeah.
I just was trying to recoup my dignity from missing some of these 3 bass questions, but back to the matter of fact. I had to do something to save face.
Okay, let me see. I'm going to give you guys an easy one then, all right?
Oh,
Let's see here. That's probably too difficult.
Yeah, we don't want that one.
What color was the submarine?
Here we go. You probably know this one. In the movie Help, in the movie Help, there's a scene where Ringo is trapped and there's a lion. And there's a lion down there where he's in this trapped room in a cellar. What does everyone sing to calm down the tiger? It's a tiger.
Keep the classical music.
Yes.
Mozart, or Beethoven, Warren.
Yes.
I think it was Mozart.
No.
No.
Beethoven. Roll over Beethoven classical version. Final answer.
It's the Ode to Joy chorus from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony.
And it would have been a bigger hit, but it was released the same day as Hey Jude and Sour Milk Sea.
You think that Beethoven maybe would have outdone Hey Jude, huh?
He was pissed right after that. He left the Apple label. Did you ever hear David Peel sing?
Oh, David Peel, you really like that guy. Well, you know,
David, we met him. I'm just trying to tell some anecdotes.
No, I never met him, but I think he had something to do with John writing Glass Onion, if you know what I mean.
Well, no, he was down in the political days, like when they were on Mike Douglas. I think he wandered out. Security was going to throw him out, but Lennon pulled him back in. I kid. And then when the FBI was following John Lennon,
I don't know that much about Mr. Peel. No,
in their file. Well, I did, and you're killing my story right now by saying you don't know who he is. Just play along. Say you knew him well. You met him at Malibu at that restaurant, and he talked to that waitress with you when she gave your script to your treatment to the writer.
Bunny.
Oh yeah, David Gill. Oh, of course. How could I forget David? Yeah. That David, right?
He had the classic song that John Lennon loved, "Up Against the Wall, Mother Blanker."
Mother Blanker. Yeah, the
Mother
Blanker.
Yeah. So I'm trying to bring our G rating back at least a little bit. But back to the questions. I digress.
Oh, all right. Well, let's see.
See, just once I want one of you guys to play along with me when I'm like out on the limb, like and starting to crack. You guys just kick it harder.
Hey, look, I don't follow people off cliffs.
No, you push.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that, Warren. Otherwise, you would be the cliffhanger, wouldn't you?
Hey, yeah. No, he just gives a little nudge.
Okay. All right. So this one might be a bit tricky, but I'll try it anyway. Yeah. What band was signed and managed by Brian Epstein in 1965, who covered a Beatles song which reached number 10 on the U.S. Billboard chart?
As for Brian,
Jerry and the Pacemakers was one of his early bands with them.
That's true, but that's not the right answer, though.
Was there one called the Dakotas?
Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas. That was 64. No.
Is it Ferry across the Mersey?
Yeah. No, that's not it, though.
That's not it either? Well, those aren't final answers, so we're still grasping. We're like in a tumble, in the water, trying to figure which way is up, clawing so our head pops out for air. Let's think.
Well, you named the only two I know about.
Jerry and the Pacemakers, the Dakotas. Who else did he manage? Come on, Warren. Is your wife there? Give her a hoot. She knows everything.
Nah, she's in bed, but she would probably know.
So she's only sleeping.
Yeah.
Was it Love of the Loved or something?
No. That's a song that I believe Paul had written a long time ago.
Peter and Gordon?
Yeah, that's a good guess.
No.
We're going through the whole catalog and like Brooke is relishing in each one being wrong.
I can't.
I'll give you a clue.
We were hoping you would.
I'll give you a clue. It's the name of the band is kind of a fabric that
satin velvet
is preferred by most men in their
fabric
tie
preferred by men
in their tie collections.
Silk.
Yes. The Silky. The Silky's the name of the band.
And they had a top hit?
I never heard of
Silky. Oh my God! Wow. Yes, Silky was number 10, and they covered. And what was the name of the song? You probably don't know.
Was it a one-hit wonder?
Was it a song they wrote for them, or was it one of their standard hits?
It was a cover. It was a cover that the Silky did. They recorded a song by the Beatles in 1965, which became.
So was it an older song, or was it one that just had come out? If it was a cover, it must have been out for a little while.
It had come out quite soon at that time. It was a recent cover in 1965.
So that would be Rubber Soul?
It could be, but it's actually before that.
Early Beatles?
No, 65. No, come on, guys. 65.
Early Beatles 65, Help.
Yes. Did I hear Help? Yes, I
Help.
did.
Yes, you've heard Help since this question began.
Help. Not Help.
That's not,
Help.
But that's not the song, though. It's not Help.
Another Girl.
No.
Ticket to Ride.
Okay, I'll give you another clue. John produced this record, actually. It's one of the first.
You gotta hide your love away.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. One of the first.
Well, we got it right at the start.
Yes. Very good. Very good.
I felt like the man with the cane and the dark eyeglasses, and you were guiding me across the street. You were walking me across Abbey Road.
If you would have hide your love away, Brooke, way back when, you wouldn't have had to go to the clinic.
I get the penicillin.
Ouch. Well.
How Ouch.
Warren,
You know who we lost recently? Neil Innes, and he wrote Ouch as a takeoff of Help
yes,
from the Ruddles.
yes, we lost.
Can we give a shout out because he was very amusing. I thought the Ruddles were top notch.
Now, Warren, listen, it wasn't my fault, that these things happened.
Okay.
I was just trying to accommodate. I was being accommodating, really.
It takes two, Brooke.
Of course it takes two.
Now this I'm enjoying. Push him further out on the limb for a damn change.
I mean, how can you turn someone down when they want that type of affection from you? It's very difficult to do. Just being a gentleman.
So you were never married? Let's get personal, deeply personal, unexpected.
Now wait a second. Now, what kind of a show is this anyway?
Yeah, this is going to be aired, guys.
You blew the G rating, so I can ask. You said you fly through these relationships like water.
Okay. Listen, at the time I was not married. You see, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anything goes, like the play said.
Well, again, the free love. I was a victim of the free love era.
I think I was too at one point.
Yes, I think you were too, Warren. Yes, I got that feeling from you. Yeah.
I always found love to be quite expensive myself.
Yeah, Bob's too expensive for the free love. He charges too much money for this guy.
No, I pay too much.
He pays too much, yeah.
I never got.
Wait a minute now. Whoa. Okay. Well, there's that funny interview with the Beatles are doing a press conference, and I love their press conferences. And some reporter asked them. They said, "Is it true that what the hell song was it? Oh, is it true that your songs are about prostitutes?"
Ticket to Ride.
I think it was Day Tripper. I think they were talking about Day Tripper. Actually.
Ticket to Ride. They got busted for that too.
It
meant like a pass that you got in a European country.
It could be. That's exactly right.
It meant that the woman wasn't skanky, that she was clean. She had a ticket. You could ask for the pass to see that she was not carrying anything you needed a shot of penicillin for. And boy, did this show evolve.
We just lost
but it's
all
true.
Our female viewers.
That's why John wrote, he wrote Bang Bang Shoot Shoot because he needed all that stuff,
There you go.
And that song, Happiness is a Warm Gun, which of course is a metaphor for, well, we don't want to say what it's a metaphor for, but we can probably figure it out, what the gun is, boys and girls, yes.
Oh, yeah. Good Lord. Any more questions?
You want more questions? Okay, I've got a couple more for you here.
Like Snagglepuss, I'm ready to exit stage left, or all the penicillin Ticket to Ride, penicillin hijinks we've been up to.
Who was the opening act at the Beatles' 1966 U.S. tour?
Was there only one?
Well, the opening act. There were a number of different people.
Yeah.
I don't know. They had like plate jugglers in those days, not a spinner.
Who was the first act to perform the show?
Was it a Brian Epstein-run band that he was promoting?
Very good, Bob. And the name of the band is?
Warren, now it's your turn. I did the best I could. The Dakotas, the Pacemakers, the Silk Tie, or whatever he was talking about before.
That's part of that concept.
Go for the Pacemakers or the Dakotas.
No.
Don't go for the Pacemakers or the Dakotas.
No.
No, I think
I'll give you a clue. They had a big hit in 1966. It was number 2, for God's sake. Number 2 on the U.S. charts, this band.
Huh.
And the song was written by Paul Simon.
Circle.
All right, Bob. Very good. The Circle. And how do you spell the Circle, Bob? Or Warren?
Cyrkle, like Bob Dylan with the Y.
CYR, right. And who came up with that spelling for that name?
John Lennon?
You must be reading Wikipedia. You bet. I bet you are.
You could hear me cooking away had I been.
Are you reading Wikipedia? I bet you are.
Only at night when I'm very bored with nothing to do. I go on Wikipedia.
I see. Well, very good. Yeah.
Actually, I go on Wikidpedia. It's a little different type of
Wikipedia. Wicked.
When it's cold and lonely, I go on Wikipedia.
Red Rubber. What was the name of the song again?
It's called
Red Rubber Ball.
Red Rubber Ball. Okay, I got you.
All right, one more question. Let's see. In the movie Help, in the movie itself, who plays the alto flute solo in You've Got to Hide Your Love Away?
Would you just like Ringo's Social Security number? Who plays the alto flute?
Yeah, at the end of the song, it's an alto flute solo at the end of the song. You've heard it a million times.
Well, Paul's father played wind instruments, and he did give Paul a trumpet, so it could be Paul. George Martin was a genius and could play anything, so I leave it up to Warren. It was a pretty simple song. I mean, a simple solo. I would guess Paul.
I'm going to agree with that. I'm going to
say one. You can say it's Paul.
John also played the mouth organ, so it's either John or Paul.
Yes, he did. No, it was not Paul McCartney. And in the movie, for God's sake, have you seen the film, Bob?
Yeah, I watched it just last night again. I have it memorized.
All right. Okay. Well, if you watch the movie, in the scene where John is strumming his famous 12-string acoustic guitar,
Eleanor Braun played the flute.
Eleanor Braun is sitting on the couch with George. Ringo's playing the tambourine. And at the end of the song, the flute solo comes in, and the person who plays the flute is the indoor gardener.
And that's the answer?
Yes, it is the answer.
That's not in the recording studio.
I said in the movie. I said in the movie, Help.
Oh, please. Now, that's an impossible question. To dream the impossible dream.
No, it's not. If you watch the movie, it's a perfectly appropriate question.
You're like Robert Goulet, the impossible dream and the impossible question. I thought you meant in the studio.
Okay, well then who record? You're saying that Paul played it in the recording studio. Is that what you?
I'm not going back for two wrong answers in one question. My butt has been kicked enough in this one. I'm not saying anything else. I have rights.
All right, so you guys are saying let's go for the studio then. All right, you're saying that Paul played the recorder. Excuse me, the alto flute in You've Got to Hide Your Love Away in the recording studio.
Well, they never gave outside musicians credit, like ever.
It was John Scott. It was one of the first musicians, probably the first musician, actually.
He was one of the first musicians ever? He must have been old.
He was very old. He was a Scot, John Scott, and he was the first uncredited musician to play on a Beatles record.
Well, it's a shame they didn't give him credit. They should have given more musicians a little nod on the album covers, I think.
They did. You know who the first one they gave a nod to? You know who it was?
Billy Preston?
Oh, no. 3 years before that.
Give us a hint.
It's on Revolver.
Was it the For No One? When the guy came in and played the special instrument, George Martin brought him in. And Paul said that was good. Could you do it again? And then he said, "Paul."
No, you're thinking of the French horn player, but no, it's not. It's not him. It's the Indian musician who plays the tabla on George's "Love You Too." It's
wherever George is, the tabla is not far behind. Was it Ravi Shankar's left-hand guy?
If you look on the back of the album, George actually gives some credit, which was really unusual. That's the first credited musician to appear on a Beatle recording.
Do you have your copy of Revolver handy, Warren?
Nope.
Just Whoa!
I hope you enjoyed the quiz show. I mean, I I
It's
certainly
wonderful to
did.
be here. It's certainly a
I'm
thrill.
glad that you got the first two. I think you got the first. Let's see. You got the first two right. No, the first three right. No, the first two. I'm sorry. The first
let's leave it at that.
Let's leave it.
To give credit, Brooke, I'm going to say your trivia show was more for Bulldog tonight because you went over my head a few times.
I'm sorry. I'm
I
sorry.
only think the hardest possible questions from his book on here.
I think it was that sour milk that I drank earlier that set me off. I'm sorry.
Other people get questions like, "What was the first Beatles movie?" And then with me, it's like, "What was doing your Social Security number backwards?"
Yeah, I mean, I could have asked you a question. I could have asked you, "What is Paul McCartney's first name?" Which is a silly question, actually.
Jane.
Yes, that's one of the easy ones. I could do that if you'd like next
Once
time.
in a while, it would save my dignity. So, Warren, would you please help our guest plug all of his books and his appearances and where they can follow his wonderful radio show?
There you go. There's your question there, Brooke.
Well, the radio show airs every Saturday and Sunday at 12 noon Pacific on radiomalibu.net. And I've got a very interesting guest coming up in a couple of weeks who is involved with the Jimi Hendrix Foundation. And, of course, we're going to talk about the relationship between Jimi Hendrix and the Beatles, which, in fact, there is one.
There is.
And then, actually, my books, A Magical Mystery Time, is available at barnesandnoble.com. And then Do You Really Know the Beatles, a quiz book, is available on Amazon, as is my most recent book, Experiencing the Beatles, A Listener's Companion. Those are both available on Amazon, and I'm sure that your listeners would be interested in perhaps checking those books out. And I think if
back in the day, we did a wonderful print article in Beatles Magazine on that book. We could revive that one and maybe stick it in the show somewhere.
On your quiz book, Do You Really Know the Beatles? I think me and Bob got to go to the bookstore.
Hey, we do okay sometimes, but these are tough questions we're getting here.
Well, I didn't want to do the same old questions, you know.
We know.
The show another time, so I had to find some new ones for you lads.
Hey, who wants to sing "And in the End"?
Oh yeah, that'd be good.
Not me.
How about I'll start it, Brooke does the middle, and then Warren finishes it off.
All right.
Ready?
Yep.
And in the end,
the love you take
is equal to the love you make.
do.